We've all talked about the 60% that disengage from church, but we haven't really moved the needle on that. To me, that sounds hopeful.
It might be a hot take, but I really do think that there can be lots of different models and methods to doing church, instead of just aspiring maybe to one type of way of doing church, or maybe trying to return to the way it used to be.
You're going to hear us on this podcast not know the answer to some things
or disagree with each other.
Yeah, or disagree completely with each other. And that's totally okay, because the goal of this is to rethink as a group. What's up, friends? You know better than anyone that culture is constantly changing. Youth ministry is complicated, and it's even more challenging to do ministry alone. So let's rethink it together. I'd love to welcome all of you to the relaunch of the Rethinking Youth Ministry Podcast.
And we back, and we back, and we back.
It's about time.
My name is Ashley Bohans, and around this table are four of my greatest friends and coworkers and teammates. I'm not going to introduce you to each of them myself. I'm actually going to let them introduce themselves. And we're going to make it a game, of course, because I'm Enneagram 3.
Okay. Game right out the
So we're
bat.
going to give everyone 30 seconds. And in that 30 seconds, I just need you to give a little background. Like, how did you get a seat at this table right now?
Man.
Okay.
And then we'll throw it to somebody else. Who's up first?
Brett's up first.
I'll go. My name is Brett Ryan Talley. I was born in Indianapolis, Indiana. I am a preacher's kid, so I have a preset list of complications of my own being a pastor's kid. I felt the call to ministry actually pretty young age. I was 14, 15 years old. Spent 11 years in local churches doing student ministry. I am an ordained reverend in the Church of God out of Anderson, Indiana, a holiness Wesleyan movement. And I started working for Orange in 2016. Never thought I'd do anything except work for the local church and work with teenagers. And I found myself since 2016 working for Orange doing the student ministry thing here.
Oh my gosh.
30 seconds.
Popcorn Shane.
Me?
Go, 30 seconds starts now.
Hi, I'm Shane Alexander Sanchez. I am the son of John and Juanita. I was born at Oakland Hospital in Marshall, Michigan.
Ooh.
And from there, if you fast forward a few years, it was my senior year of high school where everything radically changed. I really felt like ministry was the direction to go. It was baseball before then, but decided to go the ministry route instead. So went to undergrad, grad school. How much time do I have left? Started in local church ministry. I was a youth pastor in Arizona for years, then moved out here to Georgia. Was a youth pastor here as well, and now I work here.
Woohoo.
And your job here is?
I'm the director of high school content. And I was like, whatever they tell me to do.
Well done. Okay, time is
Do what they
up.
say.
We ready?
Yeah.
34 years, youth ministry, don't plan to do anything else, don't want to do anything else, want to finish with my hair on fire, believing in the next generation, led 3 local church youth ministries in small all the way to mega church experience, worked with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, have worked at Orange since 2008 as Director of Student Leadership, co-authored a couple of books. The best thing about me is my wife, Kelly, and our 3 young adult children. And I consider the people around this table some of my very best friends in the world.
Oh, that was so kind. He just flipped it to us.
Yeah, that was great.
That is the most Stuart
Leave it up to Stuart Hall
moment.
That was great.
Moving on. Leslie.
Take it away.
30 seconds, girl. You got this.
Here we
Leslie
go.
Mack.
And the Mac is back.
No slack.
Is that
And
Jesus?
Leslie,
All right,
take it away.
Sorry.
Oh man, okay, so I don't know all the things to say because I didn't write anything down. But like Brett, my dad was a pastor, but unlike Stuart Hall, I was not interested in like working in youth ministry. I didn't even know professional youth ministry was a thing. And so here we are at the end. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. But I have always loved and worked with teenagers and students. We went to a tiny church in South Atlanta where my family was kind of the lead family. So everything from graphics to worship leading to Sunday school to all the things was me and my 4 siblings and my 2 parents and the handful of people who were coming faithfully to our church. So that framed a lot of my context. And then I went to work at one of the largest churches in the country, which just brought in even more of my experience and all of that. And then I came here to work at Orange, which I love so much. It just kind of shapes my whole, rounds out the journey. So.
And your role at Orange?
Oh, my role. Yes, I am our director of high school strategy.
Woo!
All right, Ashley.
Ready, set, go.
Okay, started my professional career as a teacher, a middle school teacher and a high school soccer coach. Was volunteering for years in my ministry and was like the staff volunteer, was doing everything. Listen, before college, I only thought about myself. Let's be honest. You guys were sitting there like, I was a preacher's kid. I'm like, no, I was about myself and winning. That's all it was. And I grew out of that, thankfully. Anyways, and moved into full-time vocational ministry, worked at a couple different churches, worked for a couple of parachurches church organizations. And now I serve as the director of middle school strategy at Orange and have, a couple books and love everything that I do. And I love my teammates so much. Go team.
So close.
Oh,
Not at all, actually.
9 seconds over.
All right. Well, it's been 3 years since we last recorded an episode. So I brought a fishbowl of questions.
It's like, what does she have?
This would be a fun way to
What
do
is happening?
I am fairly certain only a minnow could fit in there.
Yeah, I don't know.
This is a little fish, okay,
is a
with some
tiny
questions, and I thought it would
M&M
be
ball.
fun. We can pass it. We can pass it. You can pick one out. You can read it, and then whoever wants to jump in and answer, or if we all want to. Yes, I love games. Here you go, Brett. Start us off.
That did nothing. That didn't shake its.
It didn't shake at all.
That was great effect, though.
Nothing
I liked it.
absolutely.
It did make noise.
It did make nothing moved. Okay. I love this one. It says, where did the podcast go?
Wow.
Where?
Starting strong.
You need to. You
So,
two.
okay. So if this is really the first episode that you're listening to, you might be a little bit confused, but this is a podcast that has existed since 2018, maybe is when we launched it, 2017. I'm not really sure. I guess Stu, Ashley, and I were the only ones that were on any of those episodes. Not you are. Yeah, Shane was on one
As a guest?
As a guest.
That's
Two, but I'm not counting.
Two. Sorry about that. So yeah, like
them got
many
cut.
of you, we experienced some life-changing events around the year 2020. And so for us, it shifted a lot of the way that we do things, like ministry shifted for basically every single church. And sadly, the Rethinking Youth Ministry Podcast was one of those things that just didn't make it to the board of what it was possible for our team to do in that season, which is a real bummer because for all of us, we felt how difficult student ministry was, and in a lot of other ways, in kind of lamenting the challenge of this podcast going away for those important years. Shane, you were saying some really helpful and great things about all of the ways that our team was still providing and stepping in and trying to help support leaders like you. But it was something that we kind of lamented and grieved a little bit about not being able to show up in this way for our partners. And I know for me personally, I'm super excited that we get to jump back into this medium and have these conversations together.
We're back, baby.
We're back.
And better than ever,
And
right?
better than ever.
All right, I got a question. Oh, this is good. And I think I want to hear Shane as an answerer and Ashley as an answer. I mean, anyone can answer, but these are the two perspectives.
You were very specific.
All right, so here we go. The question is, what makes RYM different than other podcasts? And because Shane, you were a listener,
Yeah.
and Ash, you were on it. So I just want two different perspectives at least, and then whoever else. Yeah.
I would say for the Rethinking Youth Ministry podcast, a lot of podcasts are like interviews. You're interviewing an expert. And I would say, even though we have 104 years of collective experience just at this table, and we're going to have a lot of other guests, by the way, I would say I love that we model like how we're thinking through things, not just at how we arrived at something. I think there's power in that. I know that was a huge thing for me. Mentors in my life demonstrated that for me to help me learn how to think differently. And so you're going to hear us on this podcast not know the answer to some things and
Or disagree with each other.
Yeah, or disagree completely with each other. And that's totally okay because the goal of this is to rethink as a group.
Yeah. As a listener, because I was a listener for years, I think it was different because of how helpful it was for me. So I would listen and it would start conversations with my team. I would listen and it was something I could send to my small group leaders at time and go, hey, this is the way that I've been thinking about this. Like, let's start a conversation on it. It was really practical and helpful. But like you said, it wasn't about having all the answers. It was about opening conversations or leading me as a leader to new ways to think about things that I was dealing with in real time. So there was something about that practicality. It's interesting because it was practical, but it was also high level in so many ways.
Yeah.
But I think that mix created great opportunities to take the content further within my context. So
Yeah.
I would say that made it different.
I would jump in and clarify. I don't think that anybody's communicated this. I don't think that there's a feeling from anyone on this podcast that like, oh, there are no good student ministry podcasts, so we've got to step in and we've got to create, the best or the only good student ministry podcast. I think that when we decided to start leaning into this idea, it was because that we would all agree that we are beyond grateful for this Orange Students team that we get to be a part of. And we get to have conversations as a team that I never really got to have.
That's so true.
With a group of people who are as passionate about student ministry as this group is. Yep. And so a lot of it was this desire of just wanting to invite people into the conversations that we're lucky enough to be a part of on a fairly regular basis, just because of what we have the privilege and the opportunity to be a part of here at Orange.
Yeah.
So true. So good.
Stuart?
One thing you wish you would have known when you started youth ministry.
Oh, I'm glad you got that one. You should do it.
I don't remember how many years ago that Marco Stryker spoke to our Orange Students team, and he talked about the fact that most youth ministries in America are perfectly positioned to reach teenagers in 1986.
I remember listening to that.
I was in high school in 1986 and wasn't attending church. But I think that idea points toward what I wish I would have known. And it's really two basic things. The first thing is mom and dad have been, are, and will always be the primary spiritual influence in the life of their child. Mm-hmm. And too often I treated parents as scapegoats when things were not going well. And I credited myself when a teenager was doing well. And the harsh reality when I think back is that the vast majority of teenagers who are still pursuing Jesus passionately had incredible parents. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean that being an incredible parent means that your child is going to passionately pursue Jesus.
Yeah.
Parenting is by far the hardest thing that any of us will ever do. And I wish I could go back and partner and walk alongside and encourage mom and dad instead of setting up opposition to them.
Yeah.
Then second part.
Can I add an addendum to that first one? Because I think it's really important to know, and you would know this because you were part of it, but as we've done research as an organization, that is true of every parent.
Yes.
So it's mom and dad, but there are all sorts of unique situations that students are in where if we take the assumption that the parent or the parental figure in their life is the greatest influence in their life, it changes everything we do about student ministry.
Could not agree more. Could not agree more. Coupled with that, I would say when I started youth ministry, back when Jesus was in high school, the Pied Piper youth pastor youth leader was the goal. You had to find someone that could speak and be compelling and be charismatic and could sing and even small groups were not even a part of the discussion. And the reality is that unless we replicate who we are as a leader in the life of volunteers, teenagers will always gravitate to the oldest person in the room who takes them seriously. So the more of you have, the more adult volunteers that you have, the longer your ministry lasts. And I didn't get that when I was young because maybe it was because people told me I could communicate well, or I love and still do love hanging out with teenagers. And I wish I would have been more focused on developing my adult leadership team.
Yeah.
Great. Man. Ooh, what do we hope for our audience?
Well, I mean, I kind of spoke to that earlier. One of the reasons that we started doing the podcast to begin with has to do with the fact that student ministry can be really lonely. And I would venture to say most people that are listening or watching don't have a large team of people that they work with on a daily basis who are as passionate about the next generation as they are. And they don't necessarily have the privilege of jumping into some of these conversations. So my hope would be that you feel like you are kind of sitting at this table in the way that you can't necessarily interact with us while we're recording a podcast, on social media, connecting with us on email or anything along those lines. We hope that you start to feel at least a little bit a part of what we do here at Orange Students.
It's good. All right, I'm going to pick one. Shane, I'm picking, I don't even know what it is, but you're going to go. I picked you.
This keeps happening.
Uh-oh.
No.
What is your latest youth ministry fail?
Oh my gosh.
Oh.
My
Tell us
latest
the worst.
youth ministry fail? Oh no.
I have a couple of really good ones.
No. Of mine?
No.
Oh, I was like, that's terrifying.
No.
My latest youth ministry fail. I don't know. The one that comes to mind the most it's probably traumatic. That's why. So everybody's done a camp contract, right? No. Okay. Well, maybe somebody out there can empathize with me, but maybe you overshot a little bit on that camp contract, and maybe you couldn't get that money back.
Wait, I'm trying to understand.
Oh, like with
How many
it's not
kids we're gonna
important.
like?
Yeah,
how
The
many-
deposit on like, we're
Okay.
bringing
Yeah. Like
50
let's just say
and
like
20
early
show
on,
up.
maybe I like set a contract thinking that the entire city would come to camp with us, and they didn't. I mean, it was a great camp. It was amazing, and it maybe cost a little bit more than we anticipated.
What happens with all that money that didn't show up?
I don't know. I wasn't the one who had that. No, I'm just kidding. Here's what I will
He
say.
put it on the tithe card.
No. What happened with all that money? No. Here's what I'm really grateful for. That early on in youth ministry, when I wasn't great at the calculations or whatever we were talking about earlier, I had a lead pastor who looked at those moments as an investment in the youth ministry.
That's great.
Like
What a
truthfully,
gift.
I
What a
remember
gift.
being absolutely terrified, but I think what he knew is that it was an investment in our students, which was always worth it. But I think to take it even one step further is he knew it was a learning opportunity for me. And that amount of grace has shaped me as a leader and allowed me to make mistakes along the way that have helped me grow and develop to who I am today. So I'm really grateful for that. And I've never left a student anywhere. So I'm also really thankful that
Nice.
I've done that.
My latest, I was speaking at a camp, and I said, sometimes Christians can be the worst, right? Trying to like relate to them. And if you've ever spoke to a room full of middle schoolers, you know, like rhetorical questions aren't rhetorical, like they answer you. And so the student goes, no, what do you mean? And then I realized like, oh, like I that was a fail. Like middle schoolers aren't even there yet. Like they don't know that sometimes Christians can be really hard. You know what I mean? I was like, I miss that.
How did you land on the content for this first season back? It said back and I flipped it over. I thought it was a
Read back.
direction
Yeah, back.
to finish.
Speaking of speaking to middle schoolers.
That very concrete. Very concrete.
Oh my goodness. I don't know that anybody ever necessarily stacked hands on these are the things that we're going to talk about. We had to come up with and make some decisions about some ideas. But there was just a lot of conversations, and I think ultimately there's a phrase I like, helpful, not just interesting. And I think that for me, that is one of the big filters that kind of decided what are we going to talk about, things that aren't just interesting things to us that we would like to sit around in a circle and talk about, but what are things that we feel like are helpful in this season of ministry for ministry leaders.
I do remember, though, the last collaborative meeting we had was pretty intense, and it really was a giant Rethinking Youth Ministry podcast because we broke up into teams and we had to literally lay out how we would talk about that. And I found that insanely interesting, very challenging, because in a lot of ways we feel a responsibility to model what it is we do here. Like it's not just something we talk about, we actually do it. And we did it for several hours about the things that we're going to wind up talking about.
Yeah. And we talked to leaders all around the country and asked them the question, like, what's the problem you're trying to solve right now? Mm-hmm. And we have like tons of answers, and we kind of categorized them and tried to make like a big umbrella topic to make sure we're able to hit what are those things so we can all wrestle together, because this podcast isn't helpful if we're not talking about what's helpful for you in the trenches right now. So
True.
All right, next up, Stu.
Ooh,
That
nice
was a good
toss.
slide there, dude. What are some of the topics we plan to cover this season? Ashley?
We are going to talk about staying healthy as youth workers, because hello. Passing on faith to the next generation, communicating to teenagers, digital proximity, maximizing space, people power, budget, partnering with parents, multiple generations working together. I'm trying to remember all of the
I
episodes.
know. I
They're
feel
so
like I could
good.
list 700
really
things
good
we've
things.
talked about, and I don't remember exactly what we
I
decided.
think we're going to dive into Gen Alpha because
Yes, we
we're
are.
starting to
Okay.
get more data
Yeah.
about Gen Alpha. That's an important thing.
The question is, what do you hope for the future of youth ministry? Let's talk about it. So I know that we've all been experiencing all of the change that's been happening over the last 3 years. I think when you're in a season where lots of things are changing and you're kind of in a liminal space, and it's like we can't really see what the future is. We have trends that might help point, where we're going to go. I think that this is prime opportunity for experimentation. It might be a hot take, but I really do think that there can be lots of different models and methods to doing church, instead of just aspiring maybe to one type of way of doing church, or maybe trying to return to the way it used to be. But this is such just prime time for us to actually say, like, what are some new things we want to experiment with and get good at experimenting. I think the skill of experimenting, especially in something as important as ministry, isn't one we get to cultivate often, because we're pretty committed to our traditions or to the structure, all that. But I think experimentation with different kinds of models of ministry. I'll just leave it there and see if y'all want to jump into any of that.
Yeah, I think that there is, I agree that I hope for the future of student ministry, there is more freedom to experiment and to dream and to innovate. But within that freedom, I hope that there is more accountability in student ministry. When I think about some of the stories that I have heard over the last 3, 5, 10 years of what happens in some student ministries, and the lack of thought that some ideas have maybe gone through, and the hiding, the brushing under the rug, the pushing to the side of some really damaging things is concerning. I would hope that there's a little bit more accountability. We've in this podcast before, we've talked about raising the bar in student ministry. I hope that in the future we continue to raise the bar of what we expect from our leaders, of the impact that we believe that we can have in the next generation.
I think youth ministry needs a makeover. And I don't mean it in a way that I think everything has been negative up until this point, but I just think that the generations that are in youth ministry right now and that are about to enter youth ministry, or are, the youngest ones in youth ministry right now, are completely different than the ones who've come before. And I would say that youth ministry has looked very similar for the last at least 25 years. I mean, even what you mentioned about Marco and what he said earlier, I think remains true. And it feels like this is a time, not just culturally, but it really does feel, if I can go there for a second, it feels like God is giving us an opportunity in this time to change some things for the better, for the future. So I think what I hope is that we would collectively be a generation of leaders who are open-handed with what the future might look like. That, as you all have already said, that we wouldn't necessarily just revert back to what was, or we wouldn't even necessarily think that we have all the answers for what will be, but that we would remain open-handed and step into what God has for us. Because I think it's going to be better than what we can come up with ourselves. And I think it's going to help a generation build a more resilient faith than the one, I think, I'll speak on behalf of my generation, which sounds ridiculous to say out loud, but you know what I mean. I hope it's more resilient than ours, because we all know the statistics, and we've all, for years talked about the 60% that disengage from church, but we haven't really moved the needle on that. And I don't mean that to sound negative. To me, that sounds hopeful, that if we get really open-handed and really honest, and we change some of the things that each of you have talked about, and so many other things that we're going to talk about on this podcast, that the future will be brighter for youth ministry. It will be healthier. There will be better accountability. And I think that the result of that will be a generation with potentially less to deconstruct, or different things to deconstruct than what we've been through. So
I was thinking that too, Shane.
All right, I grabbed in the next question. When it comes to RYM, what are you most excited about? I'm most excited because I feel like over the last 3 years, this is what I've been asked about the most: is when is the podcast coming back?
Now you have
and
an
so
answer?
I'm so excited to finally be like, it's back, subscribe, you know? So that's what I'm most excited about, just to have the resource to be able to send to people and connect with youth workers around the world.
Yeah.
So
That's good.
I am selfishly most excited about having more opportunities just to hang out with my friends and have these kind of conversations. Like, you know, like I've said, like we kind of naturally lean into these conversations in different times, even if we're supposed to be having a meeting about something else. We tend to kind of drift into these kind of conversations organically, but intentionally setting time around to really just have these conversations with microphones in front of us is something that I am very excited about. How often will we release new episodes?
Good question.
Every morning.
Bi-daily, right?
Right, yeah.
Every like a morning episode.
Hourly.
And then we
that's the
hourly.
goal. One day.
We're going to
Brett.
release a sentence an hour.
I love it.
I think for this first season of being back, we're going to aim for every other week.
Okay.
And then we'll reassess.
Okay.
So hopefully it's helpful.
Reassessing. Stuart, that was really fun. I'm going to pass it again to you.
Okay. Good pass.
Oh, it's just
Become a
satisfying.
game.
Oh, this would be really, really good for us to do in like one sentence, 15 seconds. Everybody, starting with Brett and going this way. What have you personally been rethinking? On your mark, get set, go, Brett.
The expectations that we put on volunteers measured against the amount of resourcing and equipping that we give them to actually execute.
Oh, good Lord. That's a home run.
Ooh, we need to add that
good.
episode.
Yeah.
So
Leslie?
good.
Rethinking. I've been rethinking the role of technology in youth ministry.
technology.
Oh, that's a good one.
That's so
Two
good.
things come to mind. First, rethinking how we organize small groups, like by grade or school versus affinity. And two, what does it look like to partner with parents in the middle school phase around the topic of social media and phones and technology, and like, because we accidentally can actually do the opposite of what we say we want to do with parents in that phase. So we're trying to figure it out.
Yeah, it's good. The role of spiritual practices and faith formation in the life of a teenager. I think it's always been important, and I would have always said it was important, but as a youth pastor, I don't know if I was creating things that would actually
develop
help
those.
a student develop
development.
as a disciple. So
good.
yeah.
I've been Shakespearean in my thought as it relates to parents winning as a parent and a Jesus follower. And the phrase that keeps going on in my mind is my to be and God's to be the same to be for my kid? Like, is who I want my child to be and who God wants my child to be the same to be? To be or not to be? That is the question. If you could have any superpower and you could use it in youth ministry, what would it be and how would you use it?
I would go to the future and then see how it all shakes out and then come back.
Wow.
I
They
want
made
to
a
read
movie
people's
like that.
minds.
You would what?
I want to read their minds.
How would you use that?
You'll find out.
It's terrifying. Well, it's been so scary today.
I'm going to go with Storm from X-Men. I hated retreat or camp days where the weather's terrible and you've got an audible. So I'm going to control the weather.
And everybody's going to appreciate you for that.
That's good.
That's really good. Flying, because then I would never have to drive to a camp again. It's just a long, like when you're on the road and it's like a 7-hour drive to a camp, and you're like, if I could fly, I could be here in like an hour or less.
I was going to say Aquaman because you would never need a lifeguard.
That's deep.
Okay, thank you guys so much for playing my game, the fishbowl game. I so appreciated all of your insight.
Oh,
I know that you are all probably very excited for us to keep talking about this stuff. We're excited to unpack some of these topics. And just to be clear, it's not going to be just us 5 on episodes. There are a ton of guests we have from all over the country, tons of denominations and contexts, so that we can make sure we have a lot of people represented at the table as we are rethinking youth ministry. So thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to restart the conversation. And the best part is the conversation doesn't have to end because the next episode is out right now.
It's already dropped.
You can listen right now.
Right now.
Wow.
Today?
Wait, you travel to the future. What is it about, Leslie? And is it worth listening to?
It is so good. You're not going to want to miss it. It's fantastic. Stay for the whole thing.
Okay.
Wow.